to break down some terms. So we did throw around interest and principal, and just to make sure that everyone understands what that is, can we just, define that?
So your principal balance is the original amount that you borrowed. So if I lend you $500, that is your principal balance. You have to pay back those $500 that you borrowed. Then interest is my profit, my fee that I'm going to charge you for lending you that $500. So now let's say I make that 5%. Next time you make me a payment, you don't just have to pay me back whatever portion of the $500. You also have to add a 5% fee on top of that. So if you don't pay back those fees, they just start adding up. And then compound interest works in a beautiful way, because every time you don't pay those fees, they get added to the principal. So now you owe me not just $500, but you owe me $25 in the 5% fee. So now your principal balance, when I charged you the next 5%, is not $500 anymore. Now it changes to $525 because you haven't paid me back that first 5%. So then they start to charge you 5% on a larger amount and 5% on a larger amount. So that's how you start to see people just go, what in the world? How is this growing exponentially? Because your principal balance will always be technically $500, but when they charge you interest, they increase it as many times as they want if you haven't paid them back that interest, that original $25 payment. So that's a big difference there, and how compounding works that can make it just even worse.
So I have a tip. So I graduated with $60,000, but what? $60,000 student loan debt, and you have 6 months grace period where you don't have to technically pay, but please guys, make your payment. Whatever interest accrues during those 6 months get tacked on. So my 60 in 6 months became 63, and that's why I have $63,000 that I paid off over time. So if you are in school now and you have a grace period, this is the time where you get to, especially if you have subsidized loans. Like, subsidized means that the government is helping you pay your interest. So that's what you want. Unsubsidized is not good. That's you on the hook. So that's the difference.
Helping you pay your interest while you're in school.
Exactly.
Okay.
To add to that, I think that there's an important piece about that grace period, because it's the same thing with credit cards, which is what I didn't understand. It's any time that a financial institution is doing you a favor, ask yourself why. Why are they hooking you up? They're not friends with you. You don't know them. They don't owe you anything. Right, it's for their benefit. The only way they're going to help you is if they're getting something out of it. And so when they say an extra 6 months of, interest free, why? Why are they doing that? What fees come with that? Always go and push further and say why. Because when they tell you, you don't have to pay till 6 months after you graduate, that's because during those 6 months, they keep charging you interest. And so, the 6 months of time that you are out of college, you don't have to make a payment technically, but every time you don't, principal balance is just going to grow with the interest. So it's not like they're saying you don't have to make a payment and we're going to pause charging you interest. That would actually genuinely be a favor, but that's not what they do. So we have to be really careful when they say, we're going to extend your payment date. We're going to push it back. We're going to give you another year of forbearance. Why? Just really, we have to be like, hold on, don't be that nice to me, because that means there's something wrong here.
And how do we find that information out? Is it something that we just need to read in the fine print, or just...
The fine print is the first step, which to be real, let's all be real. There's always been a point in time where you signed something that you didn't read carefully. I've done it. I know. I mean, that's just the case. It's font 3.5. How am I supposed to?
Exactly.
Come on. My glasses don't work that well. So, but the thing is, pick up the phone and call. Like, don't be afraid to get somebody on the phone and ask them the questions and be tough on them. And if they're explaining something to you that doesn't make sense, ask to speak to their supervisor, because someone there is legally required to explain to you what your end of the contract is, and answer your questions in a way that you actually understand it. So don't be afraid to push back. I need to talk to somebody. I don't understand that. Explain it differently. Put me on the phone with your supervisor.
No, and I think that's an important point, because that's where when I graduated, didn't even graduate, I was still in school, my loan got defaulted on me. It was a private loan, and I didn't understand the promissory note that came with it and all of the things that I was required to do in order to show that I was still attending school full time. So I was a full-time student, had 2 years left in school, and I had a defaulted student loan on me already. Which created a lot of barriers after the fact. So understanding and asking those questions, which I failed to do because I get on the phone, I got a pink notice, I didn't know what this meant. They're saying, you have to show us proof that you're in school. And I said, I'm in the National Clearinghouse, where whatever you guys are using to kind of verify this, it's showing that I'm a full-time student, and it's been concurrent. And that, literally the fear and the being paralyzed into not getting the information and not getting the right answers that I needed caused my loan to default, and exponential. That was over $10,000 of interest tacked on by the time I ended up getting sued, and it caused way more damage than it needed to if I would have just addressed it up front. So asking those tough questions and not getting afraid and not being lazy about it, because if you get the phone hung up on you one time, you got to call back and continue to call back until you get the right person on the phone that's going to explain that to you, because it's going to be to your detriment if you don't follow up.
Yeah. What are the questions that we have about paying off student debt or any credit debt at all?
Shireen Ritchie, hi. I just wanted to, you mentioned your secure emergency fund amount. I know everyone has different thresholds, but in your opinion, is there a minimum? Is there, are we looking at 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, 20,000 in comparison? And just to say, I would hope everyone in this room makes at least 40,000. So if we do, and if you don't, that's fine too. Maybe that's it. But I'm just saying in the sense of basic, what would you think in a yearly basis, you think is a good emergency fund?
I mean, convention says between 4 and 6 months, but of your spending, but I think that's a lot of money, and I'm like, ugh, no. So I don't do that. So at a minimum, I try to have $1,000 in my emergency fund, and that's because my cost of living is very low. I'm very frugal, and the emergencies that pop up is not that much. However, now that I'm a homeowner, I'm getting older, I realize I have to up my emergency fund game. So now my goal is 5,000, to have 5,000 all the time. So I think, yes, there are conventions that say that you need to do this, but you have to look at yourself. Can that 5,000 be invested instead? Can I put it in, a Roth IRA or something like that? So for me, 1,000 works great, but now it's going to be 5. Maybe in 10 years, it'll be 10 or 20 or 30, but that works for me.
So my initial emergency fund when I started getting out of debt and the journey, it was to try to get $1,000 in there. And that was the toughest $1,000 the first 1,000 is just something that you have to continue to fight until you get to 101, and then it might go back down to 990 for a little bit. And then you just got to keep on. That first 1,000 was my hardest. But I do think, for me, I think personally, 3 to 6 months is a great rule of thumb. If you are a contractor and don't have consistent work, or even you do have consistent work and you're 1099, I think it's very important for your starter emergency fund while you're trying to tackle debt to be a little bit more than 1,000. I always recommend maybe 2,000, 2,500, depending on your expenses, to keep that as a contract work. You never know how the economy is going to go, and especially I feel like contract work is usually the first to get the boot.
This question is a great one, but the answer sucks because the answer is really not that helpful, and the answer is it depends. Everybody want to say 3 to 6 months, 5, 6, 10 months. All of that's great and pretty, but at the end of the day, what if you have a very specific situation that makes you very stable? And let's say you're married to somebody who's never going to lose their job. They have a government contract or whatever. You never know, right? So if that's you don't need to have 3 to 6 months. Your security is so high that your emergency fund can be very low. If you're the type of person who's working part-time or hourly, or you get called for jobs when you get called, and then your job security is very low and stability is very low. So your emergency fund better be very high. And it sucks because those are usually the jobs that don't pay well, which means you have to work harder. And before the question, I forgot to add to the other question that was, how did you end up paying off all that debt? We talked about being frugal and cutting back and making sacrifices, but what we didn't talk about is earning. And it cannot be just you. It could, but it doesn't make the most sense to just be frugal and make all these cutbacks and have your emergency fund pretty and just not be spending. You have got to increase your income. And that means you have to seriously get yourself more skills. Become more skilled. If you don't like public speaking, work on that. If you don't really know how to use a computer, you better get on there. If you don't know how to edit images and videos, you better take a YouTube video and figure it out. We have to make ourselves as profitable, as skillful as we can, because the way technology is moving and the way the job force is working, you're quickly going to be out of a job if somebody can outskill you and can outwork you. And so what I did, I was tutoring because I was a teacher, so I had my teaching certificate. I could go to any parent and say, I'm a certified classroom teacher. That makes my time worth $125 an hour versus my friend who was making $25 an hour tutoring in college. So I knew, okay, I got certain skills. I've got this certificate. I've got these things that make my time valuable. Let me market, let me do do that. So I was tutoring, I was babysitting, I was doing what was that job I was doing? I was doing a website like that. They had videos on their website, and then I was the person that would be like, welcome to this site. Today you're gonna learn that. It was paying me money. It was paying money. I bet you there's kids in the middle of Appalachia somewhere like, that's the lady from those videos. I was like, yeah, that was me. But it was paying. And so I couldn't just say, I'm going to cut this, cut that. I also had to increase my income. So when you do that, you're able to then say, all right, now my emergency fund, if it doesn't feel good for me to sleep at night with only $1,000 in my bank account, then I know I'm a worrier. That's not enough for me. So it's all these things and more to make the decision that works for you.